happy holidays. I okay, I'm gonna give a little bit of context first. I have written a few books and I have a bunch of ideas. However, I've decided to pursue ones that fit together as a group for the sake of making it more logical that if, this thing would get published with this thing, then, you know. And so what I've basically done is I've decided that I'm gonna write a book that is also a contemporary, because the book I'm currently querying and the one that I did for Camp Novel Bound, the sequel to that one, is contemporary. Instead of about, however, Formula One and about a sportswoman, I'm writing about a pop star. So I thought I would do a sort of diary of sorts where I make videos going through like the entire process of making this book. And the first step is to plan it. Now I've got obviously a vague plan. I was scrolling through Pinterest. I was doing like one of those challenge type things, not a challenge, but like you get given like, a word like actor, singer, whatnot, and you search that and it shows you a singer and that's your singer. And so I did that and I got a picture of Sabrina Carpenter that came up, and for whatever reason that one specific picture, I was like, I need to write a book about a singer, and then the idea came to me and I'm so excited. I think it's gonna be great. I have written a cover letter for it already, which is a query letter in American terms, and I feel about it the same way that I felt about Formation Lab when that was just starting, and yeah, I feel like this also has more opportunities in terms of like finding an audience. So I'm not gonna show you the screen, but I'm gonna talk you through what I'm doing as I'm doing it, to sort of prep this and then show you, like, I'll put a picture of the outline and stuff with obviously information obscured so that you can see sort of how I plan a book, because I just think it's interesting, and to see it go from like an idea with a few things to fruition. So basically it's called Buried Under My Rose Garden. It's about a pop princess who, she is on like her first stadium tour, right? So it's her first big tour that she's doing. She's huge now. She wasn't huge before. And she's experiencing high levels of fame, and like it's her dream come true. Basically, like this whole thing is her dream. But there's this complication, and the complication has something to do with something that happened 8 years ago when she wasn't super famous and she was writing her first album. She was just living in this house that she no longer lives in, but that she still owns, and she now gets tied because somebody remembers a missing persons case. They have this missing persons case that comes up, and the person was last seen at one of her gigs, and it took a while because the missing persons cases, they're always like random, but she's now big, and so somebody remembers her and seeing her perform, and hey, that was that person. And so it basically is just this sort of almost like a mystery, but not. The way that I describe it is, it's like act 2 of the short and sweet tour if the singer of that show was Alex Mahone from series 2 and 3 of Prison Break. I actually hadn't watched series 3 of Prison Break when I like came up with the idea, and then the more I watched, the more I was like, okay, this is like, it's very vague. It's not, but the thing is, I can't really talk too much about the specific details, because obviously you don't really know how involved she is. All you know is that she's really freaking out about it, because she's the kind of person who doesn't necessarily understand when is like too involved to be bad. And so like if she, for example, to give a just, you know, like an idea of the kind of thinking that she has, if she was to accidentally find something that had fallen off a shop shelf in her bag, she would feel like she was going to go to prison if she went and returned that and was like, oh, this fell into my bag. That's the kind of person she is. That's the kind of thinking that she has. And it's, you know, this sort of catastrophizing mindset that doesn't really do her any favors. What I can tell you about is that the vibe is very classy, very jazzy almost. One of her albums is called Jazz Club Smoke. And she does do pop music. So for example, she has a song from a different album called Gut the Bower, which is about how music has changed through the years and how the death of like the showgirl kind of gave rise to, for example, pop music. And, you know, obviously it wasn't just a sort of jump from one to the other, but how music has changed and performance has changed, especially in live performance. She has songs that are about, you know, alcohol, one that's called Honey Splash, which is, it's about bourbon, but it's actually about sex and like enjoying sex. And then she has her album Rose Garden. Rose Garden is, it's got a bunch of songs that like themed around a rose garden. So she has one called Powder Petals, which is about the delicate sort of nature of beauty and, you know, how there's always that sort of balance. And then she has Buried Under My Rose Garden, which is one of her songs, which is about the ugly things buried beneath beautiful exteriors, which is, the song is supposed to be about how she's got like these jealousies, these insecurities and things like that, whilst being one of the cool girls. Her name is Madison Howard, but she goes sort of publicly by Maddie Howard. This is all just basic information, but essentially I wanted her to be a cool girl. I wanted her to be, I feel like Madison's a very cool girl name. Ever since Splash, it's been the name of like that girl, you know, who's just beautiful and she doesn't care what people think. It's one of those names that I think as well, Maddie, it's innocent and sweet, but it's also still got that connotation. Her music is a huge part of this, which is why I've got specific songs that I've got the names of. Especially the first part, the story is split into two parts. The first is Rose Garden. The second part is named after her next album, which she writes during the tour for the first album, and she starts writing it when her mental state starts to get a little, when she's, you know, she's panicking because she's involved in this case and she's like, this is my dream life. I don't want it to go away because of something that happened 8 years ago. And you start to figure out like little bits of what happened, and how deeply she is involved. And then eventually in the second half, it kind of is like she's fully in the breakdown. And I don't feel like that's a spoiler because obviously, you know, it's literary. I always feel weird saying about my own writing, like, oh, it's literary, it's whatever, because I feel a bit weird assigning sort of strength of my writing, you know? I feel a little odd saying that, but I'm gonna give it a go. Worst case scenario, it ends up not being literary and it's just a contemporary novel with a literary leaning feel. But I'm reminding myself that there are probably a lot of people who write really great books who feel like they're not special or that they're not that good or literary enough to be considered literary. And I'm trying not to do that to myself because I think that counting yourself out is how bad things happen. So basically, she's got this vibe, right? As a singer, she's got this image. I came up with some characters last night just in my notes app. I always think that that's much more preferable to doing it on a computer because I like to look at the meanings of names, just to see, and also to see if they're like, they were popular at the time that these people would have been born. So I just do stuff like that. And then in relation to this, it's raining quite heavily. I could hear the rain, which is unusual. I can like barely hear anything in this room, like from outside, and so if I hear it, it's usually because it's bouncing off the conservatory roof right below my windows. So it's just like, okay, it has to be really heavy. And people will be like, oh, it rained a lot, and I was like, did it? Because I've just been in here all day oblivious. Even with like the blinds open, I can't always tell that it's raining. It's kind of, but basically I wrote 5 different names for 5 different albums. They all have a similar sort of vibe to them. She has that like late Taylor Swift thing of like naming songs stuff and having like high concept but while being pop, if that makes sense. So she's got like this very jazzy, you know, classic vibe to her, but she sings modern pop songs about modern topics mostly. And as she progresses, the album that she writes when she has her like sort of breakdown, it gets like darker, and it sort of is a representation of her mental state that comes out, and it's like the image that she can't hold inside of her anymore, which is very, it's like the vibe is, I think, really good. And then basically what I have to try and do is figure out an outline system. Now usually I would say I'm going to do this many 1,000 words as a sort of aim, because that's like what's typical. So let's just check. Okay, we'll aim for 90 to 100,000. Let's just go with that for a start, right? How do you actually, I can never remember. Why is it saying that I've lost a word? Where did I lose a word? I haven't removed anything. Oh, no, I did. I removed the, I wrote, when I came up with the idea, like a first chapter, I've turned that into a prologue because it's literally 269 words. So I removed the number from like the heading bit, because I think it's cleaner this way, that it happens outside of the main story, because it's like the catalyst of her sort of journey throughout the book, but it's not a scene that's worth keeping in and like extending just for the sake of it. So it's a prologue. And then we've got part 1, which I like having parts in my books. I don't know what to say. I like them. I like it because, especially as a reader, you get to a new part of the book and you're like, I get like 3 pages further ahead in like a second. It's great. And especially when they have names. So the first part is called Rose Garden, after the album that she gets the studio sort of success with. She gets like a bunch of nominations, she gets the whole stadium tour, and then so the first chapter is her just after the prologue, like in the immediate sort of moments after, but she's alone and she's sort of in that feeling rather than there being a transition, because I feel like that's more powerful. Like rather than having a transition in the text, to have it as a prologue and then cut into it and she's in the main body of the story visibly panicked, like that to me is more powerful. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if this is helpful, by the way, sorry if it's not, but I want to do a few videos like this as like a diary, because I did that with Formation Lab. I did a lot of videos on, actually I'm gonna take a screenshot and I'll put this in because this is, I think, quite cute. My notes symbol. I have them, they're different in each book. In this one, it's musical notes. Cute. But yeah, I'm gonna do the outline. and I tracked the whole of the writing process with Formation Lab. I didn't track the creation process because I did that very sporadically, when I was able to, as and when, you know, mostly in bed. But I did sort of do a lot of filming of like me writing. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to try and do some writing vlogs. I don't know how long it'll take me to do this. I'm going to aim for like a 3-month sort of deadline. We'll see. That's... If we're aiming for like 90,000 words, how do I set a word target? There we go. We'll aim for 95,000. That did only take me... Oh my god, it's at the bottom this time. Have they changed that? It used to be at the top. I don't know. Whatever, it's fine. It literally doesn't make a difference, except that I have to look down instead of up, which is slightly more difficult for me, but whatever. Basically, I did film most of the writing for that. I did it over 2.5 months and it was finished, so I'm going to set myself a 3-month target. I don't think that's unreasonable for less words, because the first draft was about 101,000 that's right, 101,000 words for Formation Lab. So that was more words. And it was a mess, but my writing's just better now than it was, because that was my first book. It'll be my 4th completed one, because I want to do this soon, because I do, as I said, I want to query this one, and I think I'm going to start querying it even if I haven't like finished or shelved Formation Lab. So I want to get this done in time for like summer, and I think how many would that be? Let's say we'll do 90 days, because that's... Well, if I start in January, it will be 90 days, because it'll be minus the ones in February. How many words? 95. $1,055.5555556 a day. Add an extra 5 before the 6. Actually, I wasn't like actually trying to do that. I just decided to on a whim. But yeah, basically 1,056 words a day, which should be doable. One thing I want to look up, and this is worth doing if you are taking this as like a tutorial, story structures for specifically a literary novel, right? Because I basically usually kind of wing it. But there's Save the Cat, which I find helpful as like a guide, but in terms of specifics, I don't end up sticking to like the percentages, because I think that sometimes stuff is more interesting in this part and this. I just think it's not the only way. Right. So yeah, this is stuff to help me figure out a structure that I might use. Characteristics of a literary novel: introspection, character driven, and usually a bit slower. That's definitely stuff that I'm prepared to do for this, and that's why I'm considering literary, because even if I'm not sure yet if my writing is good enough, which I'm trying not to think, I do also believe that it's worth acknowledging that like literary is a genre, and it has, when you consider it as like a type of novel that gets written, like an overarching way of writing a book, I suppose like a style of writing a book, you could have the same plot in another book and it would be more about the plot. In this, it's about the character. So technically the story, yes, you want to know what happens. I want it to be a sort of mystery, but also everything is going to be revealed in the first chapter of the second part of the book, because it's mostly about how she deals with everything that's going on more than what's outside of her. So it's introspection, very internal stakes. And in theory, there are external stakes because there needs something to, you know, drive. Like, you have to have... Oh my gosh. Okay. But it's just harder to think about it because that's not what takes the priority. So you're not moving through one plot point to the next so much as you're lingering on them. And yet you have to do that without it being too slow. Yes, this would be very helpful. I'm just looking for story structure because I think that it sometimes is really helpful to see what other people think. Okay. We'll go with the basic sort of save the cat type thing, and we'll say it is really raining. It's like amped up, a bit crazy. Wow, imagine rain in December. So I've got this, like, this is the plot. It's like part 1, part 2, like a little paragraph. Obviously, I'm not going to read that out. I'm so sorry. Is this boring? I feel like on the one hand I ramble a lot, but on the other I don't ramble enough. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna want to insert a table. I forgot what I was looking for. I like to do 3 columns personally, because I like to have the chapter number and then a description of the chapter, and that's it. So I have 3 columns. I want, let's say that there are 10 chapters per thing, and they'll just be maybe a little longer. Then what I do is I decrease the width of the first cell so that it's just big enough for a number, and then I increase the width of the second cell so that it's super long. I will show you what I mean. I'm just going to fill in the things, the numbers, which, where's my key? There we go. Oh, man. I should do this with my left hand. And then what I like to do when I have a book that has parts is I like to just highlight I do kind of see this as like a peach book. Like the colour scheme, kind of peachy. I don't know why. Sort of like a, not quite orange, like a brown. Like a browny pink. That. So we'll split it into 2 parts by highlighting the numbers of the chapters that are like the first one of each part. So I'll show you what I mean on the screen by putting it up, but basically the first part is chapters 1 to 10. So chapter 1 is highlighted rather than me putting in part 1, part 2 into the thing, and then chapter 11 to chapter 20. So I then like to come up with the ideas. Now the first chapter, I know how that opens, and I know how the first chapter of chapter 11 opens. So I can fill that in. Basically, so for example, chapter 11 is, it happens 8 years ago, and it's, so that the first one, it's literally just going to be everything that happened 8 years ago, every little piece of how she is involved with this case and why she's so stressed. Everyone is going to know. have filled in 4 chapters. The first chapter, for a first chapter, I don't like to set too high stakes because I don't know the character yet. I don't know the way that the story is going to come to me. It's usually different for each character that I do. The way that I prefer to do it is to leave the first chapter very vague and just have it be an introduction to the character, to the world, and to any other major characters who may be around. I think in total there were like 9 characters that I wanted, including the guy who was missing, the one whose case she gets drawn into. I think there were like then 7 people on the tour with her, and then just her. The book is going to just take place across the time span of the tour, her first tour. So the first chapter is the first show, right? That's when it starts. She is walking into the first show, and then the prologue is on her way into the stadium. Somebody asks her a question, and she just kind of freezes a little bit and answers and is like, and then the first chapter is like her wondering whether or not that question was more pointed than it sounded, and like whether or not she's thinking too much into it, which she is. But it's like her mindset is like very clear, but it's also the clearest that it will be from like her experience. So it's the first show. It's just going to be a casual introduction to her and the people around her and the way that this works, the way that things are normally in theory. And then the last sort of chapter is going to be the last show. So it's one of those like full circle stories where you see the change in her and like the story has been resolved. And so the actual plot, it's finished, but like so is the tour, and yet there's this like lingering stuff that she hasn't dealt with, right? But it'll be fun to read. Like it won't be like unfinished in the sense that when you read it it's unfinished. It'll be fun. I like when things are justified text wise. I just prefer it. And then we have the last chapter before part 2 begins and the first chapter of part 2. So I have a very clear image of these chapters because they're like the really easy ones. I think when you come up with a book idea, maybe this is just a me thing, I don't think it is, but you have a very specific image of like what it's gonna be. And so you see things like, for example, oh, she's going to be on this tour and it's going to have like this kind of vibe to it, and it's going to be like, that's going to be the first chapter because this is like what the book is, and you get to see right now what her life is like before it starts to go off the rails. And then that the final sort of chapter has to make sure that everything's been wrapped up, but depending on like the way that your character is, maybe their internal stuff isn't wrapped up. Maybe there's something that's left unfinished because it is better for the story for it to be left unfinished, and you want to leave it so that the readers have that in their head, right? With the end of part 1 and the beginning of part 2, it's a kind of similar thing. You're basically starting like a new book for part 1 and part 2, but you're not. With Formation Lap, it's split into 2 parts. The sequel is going to be split into 3, but I'm still only on part 1 and I'm 50,000 words in, which is crazy. Which is actually why I'm not finishing that first, because I'm putting Project World War II on the back burner for a while. I need to do a bit more research because the writing process is really slow for it, and it's just not in the right sort of genre for me to be focusing on it. Like I wouldn't have queried that if I wasn't successful with Formation Lab, so focusing on something that I can. But I would have finished the sequel to Formation Lab because it was really easy to write and it was like really fun. But I'm 50,000 words in and I'm less than a full third of the way through the book. And yes, it won't realistically be 150,000 pages. I don't think that's going to be the case, because I think part 2 is a little bit shorter than part 1, because part 1 is like the real build-up, it's like the heavier part, and then part 3. But part 1 of each of my books and then the second part and so on is different enough that like it doesn't feel different, but the characters have changed, right? By each new part, the characters are different than they were before. In Formation Lab, the first part is her first year. You know, she's a rookie in the sport, she's having a lot of trouble. In the second part, she's in her second year, and she's not doing the best ever, but she's got this renewed mindset. You know, she's feeling a little bit better about the fact that, you know, it was her rookie year. And also that's when it's less about her internal stuff being the problem and more about the fact that she has this relationship with this other guy. Like, they're like terrorizing each other on the track. And so it starts to build more into that. Like, it shifts from her being this insecure person to being more about the way that she interacts with other people rather than just with herself. Which isn't to say that there's no exterior stuff in the first part, but it's about how that stuff impacts her individually. Whereas in the second part, yes, that is still a part of it, but it's also like there's a lot more stuff that happens, and it's like it's out of her control almost, and it's not how she interacts with it so much as it's like her coming to terms with the fact that this exists and that it's a problem and it's not going away. And then the second book of the series is all about that problem, and it's funny, there's an argument that she has with Joel at the end of book 1, at one of the last chapters. It's my favourite chapter. He says some things to her which she's like, you literally don't even know me, how are you going to say that stuff? But he's right. And so the second book is a lot about their relationship, but it's also about her relationship with herself and about addressing the fact that she is the things that he says about her. And she doesn't realise that he's right, obviously, because, you know, she doesn't think that he is. But it's about the things that happen that lead her to realise that she may be those things, and that maybe that's not good and she should be doing better, and she should be trying harder to be like better for other people and for herself. And I just think that each part, sort of, the first part was about easing her in, the second part was about preparing for the second book, whilst also having it close up in a way that was quite satisfying, in my opinion. I think it works as a standalone, but also as something that you keep reading. I've had people say that it was a good ending, like as endings go. It didn't feel cheap. Like, she doesn't win the world championship in her second year of Formula 1 and it's like, oh my god, she won the world championship. What she does is something that she needs to do in order to feel ready for when she does win the world championship and for when she's actually in that fight, sort of thing. And I think that that's important, right? My point with this is that part 1 of this book is kind of normal, right? Like, she has this guilt over her involvement in stuff, but the reader doesn't really understand why. Like, they don't know for sure. They may have suspicions. You might have suspicions hearing this. Good for you. Sorry, that sounded sarcastic. I didn't mean it to be sarcastic. I have a problem with tone sometimes. It's hell. But basically, the first part is her slowly getting a little bit worse as things start to get a little bit more pressury. You know, she's got a lot of fame and she's starting to learn that maybe that fame that she's wanted isn't so great when she still has these feelings that are unresolved over this thing that happened 8 years ago, okay? I say the thing that happened 8 years ago, it doesn't really talk about the thing that happened 8 years ago in the first part, but it's going to be in the blurb. Like in my query letter, it's the first thing that mentioned is that 8 years ago she was living in this home in rural California and she was not very famous and blah 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 blah. And it's important that you sort of know that for later sort of thing. And so there are going to be references to life before she got super famous, before she wrote her first album, but it dances around it. And then the second part, the first part ends with an undeniable switch. You cannot ignore the fact that things have gone downhill. She cannot ignore the fact anymore that she's not doing so great mentally. And so the second part of the book, it tells you everything that happened so that you understand simultaneously what she did that she feels bad about, or like, you know, what she like helped out with and stuff. But she doesn't necessarily, like, you read it and you understand that maybe she did that thing where I said where maybe she was catastrophizing a little bit and it's just kind of spiraled from there, and that like it's not as bad as she thought it was, but also she's made it worse by being the way that she is. Does that make sense? Like it's kind of, it's very inside of her as much as it is something physical, right? And so she is in this mindset which is, it's objectively worse than it was. She can't ignore it, but she doesn't know what to do about it because she doesn't feel like she can tell people about it because she feels guilty over something that she did. And like sometimes when you like wait a really long time, you start to feel worried, right? That like what you've done is unforgivable and well, I should have come out sooner with it and stuff. And now there are people watching her, connecting her with this thing that happened, and it's like, do I say something? And so she feels kind of trapped in her own mind almost, and in her own feelings. And this is when she starts to write this book, and she starts writing an album, and it's a lot more like, there have been hints throughout her work perhaps that she has these feelings, and that there's like this line or two that gets mentioned and you're kind of like, hey, that's a bit weird, but you don't think anything of it because she's a storyteller. And then comfy, and then the second half she starts to, it leaks out, right? It's like she's being infected and the inside is starting to become visible on the outside, you know? And I just, you know what? I'm not going to say the name of the album. It's not necessarily a spoiler because obviously it's the name of the second part of the book, so people could just literally flip through and be like, oh, that's interesting. But basically she's writing this album and there's a lot of allusions to darkness and hell, and the idea that like she's clearly like, this is like, it's festered for a really long time. And now that somebody's brought it up fresh, she's like even more, and she's getting erratic. Also, I didn't even say, I turned the fan on, so if it's super loud, sorry. But I was quite warm. And it's not actually on super cold, it's just very loud. It's literally on at like 20 something degrees. Which is somehow still cooler than the rest of the house, which I'm sure was supposed to be at like 19 degrees. This is not on topic, I'm sorry, but like, but I think what I want to do, okay, usually what you do is you'd have an inciting incident and then stuff would go kind of woo. I think the 3-act structure is what we learned in school, like primary school, when we were like learning how to make stories. Like a little mountain, you have to climb the mountain, make a little camp, And I've kind of ditched that because the prologue is the inciting incident, in theory. But also it's not. So I think what we'll do is we'll have chapter 2 be when the real inciting incident happens. So chapter 1 is when an interview person, like a journalist, asks a question and she's just like, The second chapter, which is after she's had her first show, it's very normal, but she's kind of, she's not doing so great, she's calmed herself down a little bit, but she's... Chapter 2, I think, is gonna be when... So the way that I figured is that this missing person, 8 years ago, they went missing, right? And that's the time period where she keeps sort of remembering her beginnings as a singer-songwriter. And this missing person is very loosely tied to her, but he's tied to her. And so the mother of the missing person, after 8 years, is like, hey, my son's been missing for 8 years and I want him found. And she has reasons for thinking this, right? And so she goes public with it. The way that I see it, this would happen in like the 2020s. And so it was the 2010s before, the internet was popular, but you imagine like an older woman isn't gonna quite know how to rally the internet to finding her missing son. So she has like decided that she has had enough of the police not doing their jobs and not really taking it seriously, because they really don't with missing persons. There's a lot of evidence of that, especially in America. Like there's an absurd amount of missing, especially people of color, like indigenous and black people. They go missing all the time. They get like killed all the time and nobody does anything about it in horrifically like old-fashioned ways that like should have been left, and not even in the 50s, but like if anything they shouldn't have continued happening after like that era of racism was like done with, like it's absurd how, especially in America, like the fact that it's legal to be in the KKK or whatever, like it's just crazy. And it's anyway, so this woman, she's kind of fed up, and it's been 8 years, and she's like, you know what, you've done nothing, I'm going to do it because if he's still out there. Basically, she finds out how to use the internet, she maybe gets a bit of help, and she starts being like, my son went missing, and she has reasons, right? It's not revealed straight away. Let's say that it happens in chapter 10, which is when I've written okay, I did write it down. It happens in chapter 10, which is the last chapter of part 1, which is when she sort of, and it's why, because it's like, it's not evidence, but it is evidence, and it's evidence because I need to write this down. Like it's something that it makes the case seem a little bit more like legitimate, right? And so it kind of amps up at chapter 10, 11, but it begins at chapter 2. So that's the halfway point, which I'll just check again that we check. So you have the hook, which is, that would be the prologue in this case, of like, I wonder why that has her spooked specifically. Like that's such a random thing. Why is she so, like, I'm intrigued, I don't know if it's a good fun of that. Inciting event, that's chapter 2. First plot point, first pinch point, the midpoint. That's this new stuff happening, which we've done, and then the resolution at the end. So we need a climax, and I actually might make less chapters. I don't know. This is the thing. I need to think of things to happen that are like in the middle. What I'm gonna do is the angle might change, because I think what I need, actually no I don't. Or do I? Do I have it on my computer, or do I have to get it off my phone because I was writing in the notes app like an idiot? I can't think about, I don't have anything, so if it exists, it's not on here, which is fine, because I'd have to just move it over anyway. It's fine. I'll have chapter 12 I can fill in, so that's when she begins to write this new album. Let me get my notes. I need to, like, this is no point. Okay, so I have added all of the character names. Usually I would do another like outline thing, like the same like grid as an outline. I haven't done that this time because there's only, yeah, so it is 9 characters that are named. There may be a few people who come up as and when, but I haven't thought about it, so it's fine. And I know like these people basically immediately. I know what they're like. I did also add in chapter 12. I have 3, 4, 5, 6. I might remove a few. I think I'm gonna go away for a bit and think, because I don't like to rush it. Sorry. I don't like to rush it, and I don't like to make a video that's like an hour and a half long. I think we're getting to an hour, so I'm gonna go. I think the next one of these that I do it probably won't be a holidays one, because I don't think I'll do another planning video. It'll be a New Year's one, which I might still do like a happy holidays thing, but also I might not. We'll see. It might be a bit, you know, but next week, because I'll do, as I said, I will follow up with a video where I start it. I'll do a video where I'm starting it for the first time. I'll do little like update videos as I get through it, as I figure things out with it, as I can share more about it. I'm super excited for this one, like so much. I have essentially immediately figured out the cover letter. I did it, it took 2 drafts, and I had 2 people, one of whom is agented and who got agented very quickly, and the other is an agent's assistant who I know from I know them from Novel Bound, which I've spoken about like a million times, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but they were both super helpful, and I know this book, you know, I have such a strong feeling about it. I understand more than I did when I started Formation Lab, so I'm thinking that this will be a quick writing process. I'm thinking that this could be a book that I query, and it does well when I query it. And I think I'm going to start writing it on the 1st of the year and try and get it finished by March, the end of March. Not March. Imagine like one of the shortest month of the year. I don't think that would be a good idea. But what I was gonna do is the next version of the Happy Holidays stuff is I'm gonna be doing, by the way, the outfit. It's nothing special below the waist, but hello? I did put in a little bit of effort. The next 2 episodes, they're gonna have increasing levels of effort put in. So please make a comment when that happens. But basically this was the first of 3 before Christmas happens. So I'm sparkly. It's the holidays. And so I'm gonna do next week's episode in a similar way, and it's gonna be a regular like sit back and talk video rather than like at a computer doing stuff whilst ignoring you. because this is like stressful for me, low-key, and also I can't do things quickly ever, so like nightmare. But I like to think back at the end of the year, and I think that's normal, obviously, because that's like you're preparing for the new year, so you think about what you did and what you didn't like and what you did. And I wanted to talk next week on Monday at the same time as this video went out about my creative year, you know, not my year in terms of anything else, but in terms of creativity and the projects that I've focused on. And specifically the topic is creative expansion. So there are two things that I'm going to talk about, and possibly more depending on whether or not I think about them. But basically I have that planned out, and then I have the week after that as well. Sorry, I'm just fiddling. I've not thought through beyond these 3 outfits. This is the blue week. Wow. I've had this for a really long time and I've never worn it because it just, I never had like an occasion where it was like, should I wear it? But I bought it because I was like, you know what, this is I love it. And I wore it today. So, and I talked about my book, which what I would advise, sounds not like, you know, not to be pressury with it, but I have posted on TikTok and I think on Instagram, on both of them, yeah. And basically I've done an updated version of my project's aesthetics. I'll try and put a picture on the screen so you can see it, but that's got like the list of projects that I'm focusing on, and you know, with that sort of aim of sticking to like contemporary stories to have like a batch that makes sense together. And then you can see the mood board for this book that I'm going to be writing, which I'm pretty happy with. I think the vibes of this book are really good. It's like when you see something and it inspires you, I think that it always ends up being very fun. Go see my Instagram, my TikTok. They should be linked on my channel because you can like do that, and you can also through those get like, I post daily on TikTok and I post more casual this kind of stuff but as a picture form on TikTok, so it's fun. But you can have fun if you want, or not. You can have no fun if that's what you want. You know, it's Christmas and I'm not a Christian, but I like to give people gifts for Christmas. I've nailed my gifts this year, so I'm gonna go. Thank you for watching. Bye. Hi, I'm sorry, there's cat hair on my plant and about everywhere in this house because 2 cats, and both shockingly fairy. Like one of them especially, he doesn't look that fluffy, but you just it's like, I find it in my mouth sometimes and it's always his hair, it's never his sister's, it's always him. And that's just crazy because he is not the one who sleeps in my bed. He is not the one who comes and cuddles up next to me and lets me kiss him a million times before he decides that he's had enough, okay? I get to kiss him like twice and then he's just like, what are you doing? Let me down. So anyway.